Hello and welcome to our webinar, Spotlight on Artificial Intelligence. We will start in a few moments. Thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, we'll just wait to give everyone the chance to dial in, and then yeah, start in a minute or so.
Yeah, we should probably talk while waiting, just to make sure that people recognize we're on. There's not anything live yet, nothing to see.
Yes, except for us three making up artificial things to say.
Yeah, bring up the joke of the day.
No, that is not in the script.
Yes, stick to the script. No inappropriate things here.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So hello everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Spotlight on Artificial Intelligence, How to Avoid the Most Common Pitfalls. We are very excited for this topic since the chat and interest in AI is at an all-time high. And I think, yeah, artificial intelligence holds huge potential for improving and streamlining the assessment process. But today, like our title says, we will be shedding light on some of the more like limitations and potential pitfalls of AI in assessment, and then also on how to navigate these. If you have questions as we go, please post them in the chat feature on the webinar system, and we will make sure you get answers. If not in the webinar, we will definitely follow up afterwards. So just as a quick intro to myself, my name is Lena. I'm an industrial organizational psychologist at E.ON, and I will be serving as your host on this webinar today. I'm very, very delighted to introduce you to our two experts, Richard and David, who will be sharing how we can get the most out of AI in assessment while avoiding the most common pitfalls. It's really great to have you here both. Thank you for sharing with us today. And will you maybe please take a minute to introduce yourselves? David, let's start with you.
Thanks, Lena. My name is David Barrett. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer for E.ON Assessment Solutions. I'm a psychologist by background, and most of my role within our business is looking at how the great science and technology that we develop around the area of talent assessment can be great to use properly in business solutions that are legally defensible and deliver good economic outcomes. And I help our practices across North America, Europe, and Asia with this in an ever-increasing way as this way of working becomes more critical to businesses as they hire and develop people.
Great, thank you. Richard.
Yes, thank you, David, Lena. From my side as well, welcome. Thanks for joining. My name is Richard. Like David and Lena, I have a psychological background. Currently, I'm pursuing a PhD in artificial intelligence, so that's where my interest lies at the moment as well. Here at E.ON, I lead our global products team, and in that role, I oversee the development of our assessment library, so leveraging latest science and technology innovations to deliver absolutely top-notch assessments to our clients. So Lena, thanks for having me today. I'm very excited about the topic, and let's get it rolling.
Yes, perfect. Thank you both. Yeah, so I think in the last few years, we have seen a huge increase in assessment vendors offering AI-based products. And we are seeing increased adoption of AI in the assessment process by organizations looking to identify and hire the best quality applicants. David, let's start by exploring trends that are driving adoption of AI in assessment. Why do you think are assessment products using AI so appealing?
Well, I think there's lots of practical reasons why they are beneficial. In many ways, they offer similar things that our conventional online assessment does, in that they can deal with a lot of data in a very efficient way, that you can capture many aspects of a person around cognitive or behavioral or values within how they respond. But I think what really, really drives the use of AI in assessment is that it is allowing us to get more information out of the data in order to get insight than was historically possible. So for example, if we look at what can be captured from a video interview, for example, that people are now able to use a video interview capture in the same way as we always would have used a cognitive or a personality type test, because the AI is allowing us to train algorithms that are able to use natural language processing to identify content within the interview so that it can make decisions around what behavioral traits or personality elements a person likely has, and is able to reliably and validly match them against job criteria or characteristics you want to select on. So if we take that example, what we have now is a massive efficiency boost, because we have an airline client, for example, that could simultaneously score 6,000 interviews together at one time and get a 98% fidelity match with what 2 trained expert interviewers were able to get. So if we look just in terms of that being around efficiency or around being able to save time or time to hire or capture data and process it fast, it's taking out steps, it's improving the productivity of a recruitment team. The other piece we also see is that when you look at the way that AI can be used, is that we see a lot of it where people want to use structured and unstructured data, where they can kind of take that in and they can look at legacy data or the footprint of someone digitally, or look at the information that might be held within resumes or biographical data. There's an assumption that you can use AI to use machine learning and very quickly start to develop a way to predict and diagnose what is likely to be the fit or capability of a person from historical data that you capture, or like paradata from within a normal assessment process. As we can see, this has lots of possibilities because it allows us to harvest much more information from what currently exists, but it also has a lot of challenges because used incorrectly, capturing historical information or social media information, we can run into a lot of challenges with GDPR, around equality legislation, about doing things that may not help our diversity strategy, etc. But there's an expectation that we can use wider farms and fields of information to make good decision. And I think the third point we have here is around improved prediction. Now, we see it usually as additive to what we capture in our normal assessment process, be it test, questionnaire, simulation, interview. But what we are able to show that it's brilliant for is that some of the places where unconscious bias was at its worst were often around things to do with interviewing or resume screening. And the great work of Richard and his team has looked a lot at how we reduce unconscious bias by, instead of having systematic bias built in, we are able to equalize for this tendency around protected groups, around gender, around age, around ethnicity. And this is a really big step forward in not just improving prediction around efficacy in a role, but also around improving prediction in terms of inoculating the system against systemic bias against certain groups. So all these factors around efficiency, productivity, they're all driving the agenda from a business point of view.
Yes. Yeah, cool. Thanks, David. I think that all makes sense, and thank you for explaining and very impressive examples. And yeah, as you said, I think it's very important to know that although there are all those real cool benefits to AI applied to assessments, there are, and you mentioned that as well, there are limitations and potential ethical and legal snares to avoid. So maybe let's start by defining what these potential pitfalls are, and then also further down the line in our webinar, giving it a bit more like a deep dive. But Richard, maybe you can give us a first rough overview of the critical things we need to look out for when using AI in assessment and selection processes.
Yes, absolutely. And as you can see on the slides, there are those 4 areas that I want to highlight where potential problems can occur. So when it comes to data quality and decision making, we need to keep the relationship in mind between those 2 aspects. That the quality of the data will inform the quality of the decision making, which is in our case the quality of hiring. So in order to maximize our decision making, we need to ensure that our data, generally speaking, is appropriate for the task that we look at, and that it's structured and cleaned properly. For the second pitfall regarding the black box system, now leveraging AI and all its components, it's great as it can process more data, but how the data is being processed still, and that hasn't changed a bit, needs to be done in a thoughtful way. Otherwise, there will be lack of clarity, no one will understand how selection decisions were derived. So we need to understand how an outcome is achieved to ensure something like job relevance or fairness or anything else to the process that we look at. Otherwise, and that's the point that David already picked up on, is one will run into ethical and legal issues. So building on a black box system will limit one's defensibility of the whole process. For instance, there could be a bias against a certain group in the algorithm that will only become apparent in hindsight. So in addition, organizations must gather and analyze applicant data responsibly from an ethical, professional, legal standpoint. So it must be clear to all parties, to candidates, to recruiters, to anyone inside the organization that are involved in the selection process, which data source is used in that whole decision-making process. Lastly, speaking about the user experience, the candidate and recruiter experience, we see that both user groups alike are somewhat skeptical around what AI-driven assessment process entails and what it means for them. So candidates don't know how it's going to affect their chances of getting the job. Recruiters face the uncertainty of how it may change the job itself. So a lot of unclarity there.
Okay, cool. Yeah, thanks, Richard. I think that's a great summary of the potential pitfalls of AI in assessment. But as said before, let's spend some time in breaking each of those things down and give it a deep dive, because I think like each of those aspects is quite complex in itself. So let's spend some time in looking at each of these. And maybe let's start then with the first point you made, Richard, data quality. Richard, can you talk us through this aspect in a bit more detail and then explain exactly what it means and what we need to look out for?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, let's start with the traditional psychometric approach. If you've done your proper research, you have a pretty good idea of what your assessments are measuring. How performance of the test relates to performance of the job, and how this data fits into the decision-making process. Plus, you have a very good sense of what the data that you look at actually should look like. On the other hand, when we're talking about creating enriched architected systems for assessments, something that is put as AI in assessments, what we need to look out for is the nature and the quality of the data that is used to build those algorithms. There's a quite big potential for bias to creep into the systems that are based on a specific data set, no matter how large the data set. So by using biased data or data that is only representative and relevant for a very distinct group of people, it could affect the system's reliability, validity, fairness, and in turn, the decisions that are made based on that very systems are biased. So one really needs to give careful consideration to the data set that is being used to develop more advanced algorithmic systems, as this can impact the inferences and decisions drawn at a much later stage. And this is why it's vital to make sure assessments using those powerful computing systems like neural networks still meet core psychometric and legal standards. That hasn't changed. So the fundamentals, they have been held up for decades and need to be held up for decades. These assessment systems need to be supported by job analysis, for instance, by validation study, local validation studies, and such evidence. And there should still be evidence of minimal risk for aspects like adverse impact against members of protected groups, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That was great explanation. David, Richard mentioned a risk of bias and adverse impact when using poor data. Why is this so dangerous?
Well, I think that what companies are very aware of, and also individuals, is that um, a a lot of AI-based systems are typically using data that the candidate does not necessarily think they are providing in order to make the decision. So, for example, um, when you are taking like a style of maybe how they play a gamified assessment, you know, about how long they take to do something, how many times they try to do something, the strategy they might have about risk. It mightn't be as clear to the individual that that's what was getting measured in the assessment. Whereas if someone's doing a numerical test or a personality assessment, it's quite transparent what's getting measured. So the provider of the information has quite a good idea about what the test is measuring, and they're told beforehand. If it's an interview, for example, in our VidAssess system that uses AI, we're measuring through content analysis and only the content, and using behavioral evidence interviewing type techniques to formulate the scoring. So the AI is quite transparent. But other systems are picking up on things like tone, your emotional state, prosodic elements, facial expression. And these are not things that the individual might have expected to be used. And same with something like a resume or a social footprint. You know, the person might have given you some information to present themselves a certain way, but you're analyzing it in a way that's more broader and unseen by them. This, I think, then leads to a scenario where the data you're capturing has unusual characteristics in comparison to what we did historically, because now you're doing things that the candidate does not expect. So they're curious and skeptical and concerned about how you've made a decision. So I think in terms of like the data capture and the data quality, that's a new world we're in to some degree. I think secondly, what companies are very worried about, and candidates, is that when people think of machine learning or deep learning, they're thinking of systems learning by themselves and self-adapting and then changing the rules or the protocols about how they make a decision in a kind of a live autonomous way. Now, I think that's what we've seen as the kind of the poster case for this was with Amazon's hiring of engineers, where they had a system that was based on machine learning, that could self-learn and then could source and find more candidates who fitted a certain profile. And probably through no malintention, they ended up having a terribly poor impact on their diversity, especially around hiring female engineers. So when you hardwire in a logic or a protocol about how it works, but you don't kind of stop it and check it periodically to make sure that it's providing quality, but also not harming any groups, like Richard has said, you know, you end up with maybe interesting data input that helps predict, but leads to very poor decision making. So I think I would like to add in there is that it's a lot of the dialogue at the moment is going on about how you inform the person about what you're capturing and how you'll use it, and then how you explain how you did use it to make a decision, and then how you can justify this both from an economic point of view, but also from a legal and diversity point of view. So I think that this is evolving fast, and actually I think improving very fast. Like the level of practical logic and intelligence that has emerged over the last year alone about what's the right way to do this is huge. Whereas 2 years ago, it was very, very diffuse and dispersed, and not very many people had solid answers. Whereas now I think our teams and others we meet are becoming much smarter about how to make this practical.
Yes, very good. Thank you. And I think that is exactly tapping into our next topic of the glass box and black box approach. So actually understanding, and David, you were mentioning that, like how important transparency is. Richard, maybe you can tell us a bit more about like the black box part of that equation, and why it's so dangerous in a way to have a black box.
Well, yeah, I mean, David slightly tapped onto deep learning systems, and let me start by pointing that they are amazing. So there's a beauty to deep learning systems, and that is that they are extremely powerful to generate prediction models for a desired outcome. And depending on the learning construct that you're applying, as David mentioned, most can self-sufficiently operate, adjust their predictive models, they can include newly available data, so they are producing better and better prediction coefficients by growing more and more complex. So therefore, those deep learning systems are not per se bad. For lots of applications, it's not always necessary to understand how an outcome is achieved. However, when the outcome is or can influence someone's opportunity to gain employment, it's of utmost importance to understand the process. So just because you're able to use an automated decision process by way of applying those computing technologies doesn't preclude you from the foundations of ensuring it's job relevant. And different forms of AI models often operate and evolve on their own, and it's not possible to even re-engineer exactly how the algorithm is operating, and that's where the black box connotation comes in. And then this is a problem, because organizations who use these types of systems will have difficulty explaining and therefore justifying how specific measures and data that they've used led to an employment decision. And even if they're able to show evidence that the AI system can predict important organizational outcomes, just as David's example with the Amazon engineers, they can predict success in the organization, but that's not enough.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, this is a good way to understand the fundamental problematic that could come with applying AI models. And David, you were already mentioning how important it therefore is to have a transparent process. Can you maybe explain a bit further why we therefore refer to a glass box approach and what it exactly entails?
Well, on a practical level, it means that if someone was to ask for feedback, or you were to make a feedback report to guide someone around their development, their onboarding, the reason why they did not get forward in a screening process, it should be possible that the system is able to give an explanation that makes common sense to a layperson as opposed to a data scientist or an occupational psychologist. So first of all, from a treatment of candidates, and like a candidate being your customer, or they are a person who is a colleague within your company, the system itself needs to be able to give sensible feedback that not just says, yes, you were 97% good, or you were 3% bad, or whatever that should be. It should be able to give you information back against the constructs on which you were measured. That's good from a candidate experience. Possibly more importantly, for high volume systems that are used for screening people in and out in a binary way, it needs to be that if someone takes a stance and says, I want to know exactly how you rank ordered me, or what were the criteria and the constructs against you measured me, and how did you use the information that I gave, in this case, let's take a video interview that I gave verbally, what kind of methodology did you use to automatically take that, and in our case, transcribe it from text to speech? What were the algorithms doing? What were they based on? Why are they valid? How did the scoring work? How did it aggregate my score together and help make a decision that could be automatic or augmented by a human? Being able to do that is the glass box, because it means you can allow the person to look into what happened. If you're trying to explain to somebody that I don't give you the next step forward in being a customer service agent because you're the tone of your voice sounded slightly agitated in it for a few seconds. That is like a state and probably is not very reliable, and that will get challenged very heavily and hard by anybody who's an expert about the stability or reliability of that information. So the glass box is there to protect companies so they can defend themselves legally, but it's also great because it allows for good feedback systems, which are brilliant for candidate experience, for development and assessment. I think that's at the heart of what our glass box approach is about.
Brilliant. Yes, thank you. Yeah, I think assessment and selection systems employing AI shouldn't be just solely on the ability to produce valid and predictive results, which is obviously super important. But as David and Richard mentioned, their results also need to be easily interpreted and explained. So I think, yeah, that the transparency inherent in a glass box approach allows for quick identification and correction also if something does go wrong. For example, if unfair bias is introduced into the system. Yeah, thank you, David and Richard, for explaining. And I think this is actually a great intro to our next potential pitfall, and that is ethical and legal issues. David, can you speak to some of the ethical and legal issues we need to look out for and how we can avoid them?
We've been covering these as we've gone along, is that in the same way as you would do a job analysis to initially set you up for a correct way to have a legally defensible position when you assess people and making sure that the measurement tools you use are valid, the same thing applies when you use AI. I think that the things that might be a little bit kind of new and emerging with AI is, for example, you should only use the information that the candidate understands they have given you and meant to give you. So I think there's a lot of importance on getting consent and agreement from the person and explaining to them what you're capturing and how you'll use it. Again, most of these actually, the more we think about it, they make sense around the candidate as a customer, because in many cases, it's not going to be the legalistic problem that occurs. It's going to be the harm that you do to your brand, because we know that candidates who perceive a process to be fair, enjoyable, relevant, they're much more likely to trade with your company, want to work with your company. Ones that are fair, transparent, and enjoyable, they are likely to report you negatively on social media, maybe less likely to buy from you. So if we look at the risk here, some of it's not legal. It's about making sure the candidate experience is good and the person is informed before they're participating in what you do. The other kind of things that are obviously very important, we covered a lot, is that you need to be able to defend your decision once you make it. So that means that you have to have a way of explaining after the event how you analyze the data. But again, that fits into candidate experience about being able to give feedback, which you would expect as normal anyhow. But if you are put under pressure around how you made a decision in terms of its legalistic elements, you need to be able to have proper structures around what you did with the data. And then maybe one other piece that's very relevant to Europe at the moment is that, we're now capturing a lot of video type data where it's less easy to encrypt the identity of the person. So historically in a test, you say you did a test and you just gave your unique identifier, your code or your name, and that could be encrypted through an applicant tracking system. But if you're being captured on video or audio, there's a file that's much more intrinsically connected to you as a person. So then I think, like on our systems, we've been very careful to make sure that all those consents about the type of data that are being given, explaining to a person how and why we would hold their video or their audio file. These are things that companies, we can help them with no problem, but there is a higher level of responsibility if you're capturing that type of video content than just test data content. So normal things, and funnily enough, the legal things oftentimes are superseded by things that are more to do with treatment of people and candidate experience.
Cool. Well, thank you. Richard, is there anything you would want to comment on from your perspective?
No, I think David covered it pretty well. Just to highlight the importance of having consent, that means an explicit consent. I mean, there are lots of different data structures out there that are based on non-reactive data, so data where the candidate provided information that is not necessarily given for a specific task. So looking at browser history, looking at social media data that is well structured, and that are an amazing source for lots of more advanced computing technology systems. Still, and David pointed that out, is we need to make sure that the data that we obtain and use, we can only use it in a way that is understood by the candidate and known by the candidate. So they need to opt in for this type of approach.
Yes, very good. Thank you. And actually, both of you already tapped into that topic of candidate experience. So I think we know what's imperative to be transparent with candidates regarding the assessment and selection process. And both of you explained that already in a bit But I mean, how exactly does the use of AI in these systems actually impact the candidate reactions? David, you already mentioned a bit on how important transparency reporting is, but maybe you can dive a bit deeper into the most common reactions to AI in the selection process and how we can actually ensure that they are positive.
Yeah, I think that the key again is about informed consent, telling people in advance what you're doing, explaining people how you'll use the data. I think again, feedback and giving information to persons after an assessment is again critical. These are all aspects of how a decision was ever made about a resume or a test or a questionnaire or a simulation that were always present. It's just that I think we're becoming more conscious of the fact that people are finding it harder and harder sometimes to work out how a decision is made on them, and they expect that to be made easy for them to understand. So like you can see that people can be very happy or unhappy about how an insurance company decides to give them cover for a certain piece or not, or how, for example, a company comes up with products that they want to offer them, you know, via, again, a great company we mentioned, Amazon, but most people are happy with how a company like that offers them products. But the secret to a lot of this is about being able to give people clear explanation of what you're doing. And in many cases, it's up to us as well to promote the benefits of this. Because when we look at what we're actually doing with the AI is we can see in campus recruitment, particularly with a lot of our clients who are growing very fast in North America, we've made big steps forward on improving the representation of people getting through screening interviews in order to increase diversity and inclusion from a wide representation of people getting into final stage of employment by these types of technology that are gamified AI assessments, that are video-based assessments. And we should be promoting the fact that we're taking out bias, we're doing it at scale, we're allowing companies to identify and include many, many more people than they would have historically if they'd gone through conventional kind of conservative methods, which were more like, which colleges did you go to, which jobs did you have, what's written in your resume. Those things are so much more full of negative bias against individual. And what we're doing with the AI in the assessments actually is helping a huge amount of candidates to get a better chance. So on one level, there's the micro communication, which is like specifically to the person, but there's also the to the market communication about that more people are getting a chance in a way that is more equitable. And that's like a macro type explanation. I think that we need to make it a strong way to regulators, to corporations, to the legal profession, so they can see that actually we are wearing a white hat, and we wear a white hat on top of a black box. I know that sounds a bit, maybe that's our new imagery, but it's more in our business about being the good guys. You can see what Richard is saying is that we do not want to take information that a person gave accidentally, did not understand, or that it is used for a purpose that was not intended. I think there's a big picture and a small picture, and we need to keep communicating and acting upon that avidly.
Yes, very good. Well put. Richard, do you want to add anything here? Candidate experience.
Yeah, there's actually one piece I think that we need to keep in mind, and that is simply put, time. So in our research, so we've done lots of studies with and asked hundreds and hundreds of people on how they react when AI is used for decision-making processes, and we see that candidates are still somewhat skeptical when it comes to using AI in the assessment process. A lot of that, and that was the far most interesting thing to me in those studies, is that a lot of this is based on the lack of knowledge about the various forms of using and applying AI. And when you think about having an ABS system in your car, that's pretty much the same. So the ABS will, in an emergency situation, override the human decision and will self-control itself on how it will brake the car in the best possible way, so that it will stop in the shortest point in time. Now, this is a machine overwriting human decision. We accept that because we know that it's far better using it that way. That is a knowledge that is not year that and needs to evolve, and we need to help with those micro and macro levels that David mentioned previously, to make sure that people feel more comfortable getting more knowledge and getting more experienced with AI concepts.
Okay, yes, very good. Yeah, I think very true. Getting, yeah, basically trusting the process, right? Trusting the AI and the algorithm is key. Yes. Cool. So yeah, we talked a lot now about the impact of AI on the candidate experience, but AI and shifts in technology in general also impact the role of the recruiter and HR. David, how will we see this change play out?
Yeah, I think that this is becoming a very practical discussion now with our clients, as many of them move to using automated tools, especially in the support of assessment centers and interviews. I think they were always used to using them around maybe the psychometrics, especially companies that hire or assess a lot of people. They had become used to some automation, and it being used to filter or group people for automated decision making. I think what's become really important here is that the good systems that use AI to measure against candidates, it will say, for example, in the context of an interview, the interviewer can go in and check the data and augment it with their own input, can monitor it, can quality assure it, that it gives them information maybe around poor data quality, or it flags something they should check. This is then using the recruiter as the human in the smartest way, because it's getting them to deal with the exceptions and the marginal cases, rather than doing all the heavy lifting and all the repetitive manual labor. So it's obvious that it can be a big change if a team's job was to telephone interview people or screen interview people, or to be an assessor in some specific part of an assessment center. But really, when we look at it over a long period of time, I'm sure that people who were picking stones out of fields as farmers 200 years ago were worried when people came along with horses and plows and subsequently earth moving equipment, that their jobs would be gone and change. But really, I think we'll look at the idea of someone completing the same task over and over again as an interviewer or an assessor, and then using a human skilled person's time to do that as a poor use of their time. So what we really know is that candidates now are better treated by recruiters spending more time speaking with them, selling the jobs to them, giving feedback, discussing the opportunity, and then augmenting the automated data to help them use that in making a decision or giving feedback. So really, it's about using the humans where they're strongest and using the automation and the AI where it's strongest. And that's really, I think, at the heart of this. And it's about, I think in a previous slide, we had about keeping the human touch, but it's about using the humans to do the places where humans have the advantage, and not just to use them as some expensive way to do what the machine can do at a very low cost.
Yes, very good. Yeah, I think everything we heard today is excellent information that can be used to implement AI in assessment and to maximize the benefits while also avoiding then the most common pitfalls. Maybe to quickly sum up what we have talked about today, we can recap what we can do to get the most out of AI in assessment while avoiding the pitfalls. Richard, maybe you can take us through the checklist we have.
Yes, absolutely. Well, you see it on screen. So look out for the right data quality and decision making. Make sure that assessments using AI meet nevertheless core psychometric and legal standards. So you need evidence of minimal adverse impact. You need proven validity, both construct and criterion. You need a thorough job analysis at least. Then choose assessment with that glass box approach, so that all stakeholders absolutely understand the system that is used for making evaluations, for making decisions, and more specifically why and how the data is analyzed. Definitely be aware of ethical and legal issues. So that includes data privacy, security issues, that you need to ensure in your selection decision, so that that decision process remains legally defensible. And then support positive candidate reactions. So making sure that candidates are empowered, educated on the use of AI in the process, and by focusing on maintaining the interpersonal interaction to the human touch, keeping in touch with them nevertheless. And lastly, keep in mind that transparency is key in every step of the process as a final point.
Okay, wow, brilliant. Thank you, Richard. David, Richard, any final recommendations or advice you have for the audience before I close our webinar today?
I'd have some final words is that I really think that you can use AI now in the context of assessment in a fair and defensible way. And the economic benefits of this are massive in terms of not having to move candidates around unnecessarily, being able to have shorter assessment processes, being able to allow recruiters to do their job with candidates around relationships and sourcing and strategy as opposed to routine work. I think that the logic around how these things predict and how they're defensible has become sophisticated. So I would encourage our clients, obviously because we're the vendors, but also because we're scientist practitioners, to actually try these things out, to use them on a certain scale where they feel they are safe. We know that on the 8th of July, we have the full launch of our AI automated scored vid assess platform that's fully validated against the Adept 15 and can be used off the shelf. We already have dozens of clients going into live mode with that. We know that over the next year or two, we'll have 1,000 or 2,000 doing it. So we're really proud of our work, and I think that now is a good time and a safe time to get into this. We encourage you to do so. We're waiting.
Yeah, good final words.
All right. Well, thank you so much, David and Richard. It was brilliant to have you on this webinar today. And yeah, this brings us to the end of today's webinar. I hope everyone enjoyed it and that you are now armed with the knowledge you need to make the most of AI in your assessment and selection process while avoiding the pitfalls. Yeah, maybe just mention we have a more in-depth product demo coming up in July, where we look at how AI is used in our assessment. So David mentioned we are proud of our work, and yeah, I hope that you're interested in joining that more in-depth product demo in July. Yes, well, thank you everyone, and hope to see you soon.
Take care. Thank you, Lena.
Thank you, Lena. Thank you, David.
Cheers. Take care.